Bo Greeny put him on his favorite team. And for 2 years, when he talked about what it might look like if Aaron Rodgers played, it was a great time. But then when he played, when he talked, when he led, none of those things came to fruition. And so if you're going to get Aaron Rodgers the player, you have to know you're getting a diminished Aaron Rodgers with all the ego, all the arrogance, all the things that came along with being a 4-time MVP. So those are, to me, the more important conversations if you're looking to bring Aaron Rodgers on your team to finish out a first ballot Hall of Fame career.
Yeah, and those are the aftershocks of the decision that was made, and it was widely reported a week ago that this, in fact, could be what happened. It was official yesterday, Graz. How much do you think the Jets weighed this decision of whether to keep Aaron Rodgers?
I mean, big picture, they weighed it, but the speed with which it happened tells you that they knew what they were going to do when the offseason started. I mean, the coach and GM have been in place, almost 2 weeks now, and this is maybe the first big decision that they've made. It makes a lot of sense. Look, 2 years, they won 6 games. It didn't work out the way they wanted it to. And now you look at your future. If you're the Jets, you have a new head coach, a new GM. You're starting fresh. What are you going to have Aaron Rodgers for 1 more year? And then you have to start over anyway. So I think it makes a lot of sense. All the points RC is making are valid. You know, he has a lot of gravity to him, right? Like if you keep Aaron Rodgers now and you're a new head coach and GM, as long as he's there, everything's about him, right? And so I think it was probably in the end pretty easy for them to decide we need to be thinking about the longer term, the bigger picture.
Yeah, there's a couple things to that. One, like RC said, we all agree, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest pure throws of the football ever. But there is the stuff that comes with Aaron Rodgers. Having said that, what do you think, who should look at a player like Aaron Rodgers with what he has left at 41 years?
Well, I think that's the challenge because Graz just said it. You win 6 games in a time there. And I do think he got better towards the end of the season last year. But at the same time, you, to me, have to be a team that you feel like adding Aaron Rodgers to your team takes you to the point where now you're competing for a Super Bowl. Because if not, you're just putting a stopgap to maybe get a wild card game or get close to the playoffs. And then you have to hit reset again next year. So as I look around the league, I don't know that there's a team that feels like, hey, you know what? We add Aaron Rodgers. Everybody's throwing out the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't see a Rodgers-led Pittsburgh Steelers team winning a Super Bowl or getting to the Super Bowl in the AFC with Baltimore and Buffalo and the Bengals trying to retool as well. And then obviously the Kansas City Chiefs. So to me, that's the challenge for a quarterback that's now going to be a year older, coming off a subpar season with the thought of now you get him and this elevates your team so much.
And it begs the question, does Rodgers still have the skill set to go to a team that's a quarterback away from getting him to that next level? And that's kind of the biggest gray area for a team.
There's no doubting his skill. It's a question of, at 41 years old, can he maintain that over a period of time? Can he stay healthy enough to be productive? We did see some good moments from him this past year. We also saw some pretty lousy ones, and that makes a lot of sense for a player at this stage in his career. The list of quarterbacks that have performed at a championship level past the age of 40 has one name on it. One. And Aaron Rodgers thought he was going to be the second one, and he hasn't been. If I'm a team, I'm looking at my quarterback options, and somebody says, Aaron Rodgers, okay, how'd that go with the Jets? Well, they won 6 games in 2 years. He missed a year because of injury. He played hurt another year. Everybody got fired. Now he's 41. We signing up for that? I'm not.
That sounds incredibly daunting if you put it that way. But
but context matters, right? And you have to understand the circumstances. He got you towards Achilles, and remember he was a player coming back from season injury. We saw what happened with Kirk Cousins and his injuries. You know, so you have to ask yourself: is the skills diminished, or was he a player coming back from an injury that takes a year and a half to play at a higher level? Not saying that he's going to be the Aaron Rodgers of old, but it doesn't still mean that you can't win football games. And at the end of the day, football nowadays are played more above the shoulders than it is above the heads because of the rules. You can't really take advantage of a quarterback that's small, that maybe slowed down because of the rules. We do know that he still has that football acumen, and he can maybe be a force multiplier for a team that can run the football and just ask him to be the old Aaron Rodgers 3 or 4 times a game.
Let's step away from the player Aaron Rodgers because I think it's important to get into the Jets now. And you kind of alluded to it a second ago. Take a look at what this cost the Jets during this 2-year run that amounted to nothing. $75 million to Aaron Rodgers, a pair of second-round picks to Green Bay, over $30 million to get receivers that Rodgers wanted. And if they release Rodgers before June 1st, they owe $49 million in dead money. I mean, this graphic, Bart Scott, puts into perspective just how bad this ended up being for the Jets So where do they go from here?
I mean, they took big swings, right? And it was important for them because they were losing the locker room to some of their younger players. You know, Garrett Wilson used to be on my radio show. He canceled during the middle of it because he just was dejected, right? And we saw with the arrival of Devontae Adams, he became less and less more of the offense when this was supposed to be an offense that was catered and built around him and Breece Hall's skill set. So it was important for the Jets to say, hey, we care about the young players because the good thing about Joe Douglas and what he did is he found them the talent. I mean, Jamal Adams' trade was a gift that kept on giving. It got them 3 first-round draft picks, Jermaine Johnson, who we think is certified, Sauce Gardner, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, Vera Tucker, right? So they have a good young nucleus. Now it's time to let those guys be the loudest voices in the locker room, and it was time to take a big shadow away, a guy that casts a big shadow in Aaron Rodgers. So I think they have to try and find a quarterback, and that's hard to do it in today's game. The draft isn't somewhere where you can find that. Do they need a bridge quarterback? They have Tyrod Taylor there. The last regime, it was all about, I forget, Jordan Travis, right? Yes. And they were hoping that he was going to be the guy that comes save the day because you need a cheap quarterback when it's time to pay the credit card bill that the Jets are going to incur for this young talent, all living up to their expectations.
And Jordan Travis, he had the injury in college, and all of a sudden he's not the value.
Hasn't been able to play or really even practice, right? So they don't know anything about him. This is the lesson of the Aaron Rodgers time with the Jets is this is what can happen when you whiff on the second pick, right? They take Zach Wilson with the second pick in the draft, and he didn't pan out. Now you're scrambling for any kind of solution. And you mentioned they took big swings. And Aaron said before the season, if this doesn't work out, we're all going to be unemployed. And that's exactly what happened. They took a big swing, but you don't have to take a big swing if you build it from foundationally with the right guy.
To your part with whiffing on Zach Wilson, this is a team who then whiffed on Sam Darnold, who obviously is developed somewhere else, and Geno Smith. So to sit here and say that, well, maybe we should draft the quarterback, I've got examples of how drafted a quarterback for the New York Jets hasn't worked.
Well, we got one that did, and that was Mark Sanchez. And I think this is more similar to the Mark Sanchez situation. They have 4 of the 5 linemen that they need. We know that Vera Tucker can play. Simpson worked out. We talk about Fashanu as well. They have the talent around and the infrastructure to just run the football and bring a young quarterback around slowly with a mentor in Tyrod Taylor.
By the way, are we sure Garrett Wilson didn't cancel because of you?
Oh.
Yeah, probably.
We are back on Get Up. Time now to do some off-season overreactions with the great Dan Graziano. Never overreacts about anything.
Never.
The Chiefs' streak of 9 straight AFC West Division titles ends next year. Is that an overreaction?
Absolutely, it's an overreaction to one game. They played lousy on Sunday. There's no question about it. They just went 17-3. They've won this division 9 years in a row. The Chiefs will throw resources at the problem. We know this. I think they'll find a left tackle. I think they'll be right back where they usually are.
Of course, and not only that, you think about Isaiah Pacheco missed a number of games. Rashee Rice was not out there in the Super Bowl. He missed a ton of games. It is, of course, an overreaction to think this Kansas City Chiefs team, because of a Super Bowl loss, is just going to go away and fly under the radar. No way.
Super Bowl beat down.
Where's Pacheco from?
Oh, come on, Rutgers, baby. You know where Pacheco is.
All right, next overreaction. The Commanders will win the NFC East next season. Graziano, is that an overreaction?
It's not an overreaction. We first have to remember that no one has repeated as NFC East champion in 20 years, and that is a stat that I stand by. So the Eagles can't win it, unfortunately for them. Too bad. The Cowboys, we don't think, are there. The Commanders are on the ascent. They got the great young quarterback. They have cap space and money to spend this offseason. Dan Quinn took the Falcons to the Super Bowl early in his tenure there. I think it can happen.
Yeah, last year was the worst that the Commanders will ever be under Jayden Daniels. You talk about salary cap space. They have $80 million to spend, and they have a talent that guys will take a pay cut that's looking for a Super Bowl victory.
Yeah, if you're buying stock in a young team, I don't know why the Commanders wouldn't be where you load up, especially in this division, making it to the NFC Championship a year ago. Okay, final overreaction. The Cowboys, speaking of, need to draft Ashton Jeanty, running back, Boise State. Is that an overreaction?
It's not an overreaction as long as they come out of free agency feeling really good about their offensive line. They need to address the offensive line. Once upon a time, they drafted Zeke Elliott 4th overall. That was because they had the best line in the league, and he was plug and play on a team that expected to contend and did. This could be a similar situation if they're able to build up the lines in free agency. He could be a superstar playmaker for that team.
And they also can build up those lines in the draft. So as much as Jeanty could be a superstar for the Cowboys, I think there are other needs, and you can get a running back at some other point in the draft or possibly in free agency, or maybe even make a trade for a guy like Rachaad White.
This is the most loaded running back draft class we've seen maybe ever. It'll be interesting to see if they go for the star power early on or the substance later on, like you said, build their roster throughout. Now, we heard from Dak Prescott this week. He said his Cowboys are close. Now, Micah Parsons has weighed in on Dallas's upcoming offseason. In a quote, obviously, talent is here, but we've got to finish and got to go be aggressive the same way they did, they, Eagles. I don't want to sit back and just watch other people build and build and build, and I stay the same. So we definitely need some call to action. Now, I believe, Bart Scott, that's probably the way Dak Prescott should have gone with his comments when he was talking to the media saying, guys, we've got some talent, but the Eagles are the class of the division. The Commanders are the class of the division. We're not close to them. We need to get better. He chose not to go that route. What do you make of what Micah said?
Like I said, objects may appear further in the rearview. I think they are under the assumption that they're not far away. But they don't have a lot of salary cap space. And the problem is the Dallas Cowboys are always reactive and not proactive. They should sign their players much earlier. They always spend top dollar for everybody. And Micah Parsons is going to be another example of that, which stops them to be able to fill their roster up with quality depth. And also they've drafted, like we talked in their meeting, they drafted well. But they really miss on signing their players and getting it for 80 cents on the dollar. They pay top dollar for everything that they buy, and that's just not a sustainable model.
I agree. But at the same time, I understand where Mike is coming from. You look at the Dallas Cowboys and the Eagles last year. They were both really good football teams, winning a ton of games. And then the Eagles go out there, they didn't finish strong. They go get Saquon Barkley, a guy like Zach Baum, who ends up flourishing in their system. Mike is sitting back and he's saying, who's going to be the guy that we go and get? I mentioned Rachaad White, but making a trade and going to get a running back, being on NFL Live yesterday, Ryan Clark mentioned going to get a guy like Deebo Samuel.
T. Higgins is out there.
Yes, going out and getting a difference maker, because not only does it add to the play on the football field, but I think it lets the locker room know, you know what, guys, we are, and we do believe this team and this roster and this locker room right now can win.
You know, it is interesting, too, when you were talking about the finance of the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones budgeting his checkbook. It's no coincidence that the Cowboys had a ton of success when Dak was on one of his rookie deals where the quarterback comes cheap and you can win around him because you can spend money. But now that you got to pay the quarterback, the pass rusher, the receiver, you're left in a precarious situation.
But it can be done. The two things that the Cowboys haven't excelled at that the Eagles have, front office-wise, are, number one, they don't get as creative with their contract structures to work around the cap. Number two, they don't press the advantage they have of knowing when to go to their star players early for extensions. That's a big thing and now that feeds on itself, right? Because now everybody sees, I can wait till the last minute and just get everything I want, like Dak did. So they have to get better at that. In terms of free agency, what Micah Parsons is talking about, the Cowboys, big picture, don't really believe in free agency as the way to build your team. And that makes some sense, right? Like the Eagles hit on Saquon Barkley and Zach Baun and Mekhi Becton, but they already had a really good foundation there, especially on the lines. They had a defense that was built on guys that they've drafted the last 2 or 3 years that all played in college together. So they already had something set up. Free agency is a good way to augment your roster, not to construct your roster. And I think the Cowboys have to approach this offseason. They got to do more than they did last year. Like it was almost like they were making a statement last year. We don't believe in this. There's a happy medium somewhere between going nuts in free agency and sitting on the sideline.
And I would say, too, that pocket of success Dallas did have that I alluded to a minute ago with Dak Prescott. What else were they doing? They were drafting smart. Tyron Smith. They were building up for Zach Martin. Yeah. They were building
first-round picks on the offensive line.
Out.
Travis Frederick. Like all those guys were first-round picks.
And I don't even need to know they need to be bold.
And that's the challenge of making sure you're drafting those guys' replacement. You said it earlier when we were talking about it, a guy like Jason Kelsey, a guy like Fletcher Cox, of drafting those guys' replacements as they get older, knowing when they walk away from the game, we have somebody to plug and play. They haven't done so, so now you're...
Yeah, because in football, it's about the redistribution of funds, right? Because it's always cycling out. You become a high cap guy, you got to go out, you have to have a replacement for it. And especially that's accelerated when you pay your quarterback top dollar. $60 million is always going to be something you have to work around.